Namaskar and welcome to our webinar series on COVID-induced rural distress. Today's webinar is the third in the series and will focus on rebooting rural economy policy perspective. Quick introductions for our new participants. I am Vinay Kumar and I represent Transforming Rural India Foundation, an organization that mobilizes the dynamics and processes of Bazaar, Samaj, Sarkar, the community, the state and the market to create a deep and durable impact on the multi-dimensional nature of poverty in the poorest 1 lakh villages of India. Sanjeev Fansalkar is my co-host and he leads Vikas Anvesh Foundation, a research organization working at the grassroots for sustainable impact. Welcome, Sanjeev.
Hello, thank you.
This webinar series is being organized in partnership with VillageSquare, which is an effort to galvanize national discourse on rural India by bringing stories of the villages, their successes, angst, and dreams. Our first webinar was on COVID-induced rural distress, role of the citizen, and the second one on rebooting rural economy, grassroots perspective. What we are going to hear today is on rebooting rural economy, more from a policy perspective. And we are extremely fortunate to have some of the best minds of the country to share their views on different aspects of rural economy. And I'm delighted to welcome Usha Thorat. She is the former Deputy Governor at Reserve Bank of India and was my senior colleague when I was in RBI for the first 10 years of my work life. So welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pravesh Sharma, co-founder and CEO, Kamatan Farm Tech Private Limited. Welcome, Pravesh.
Yeah, sure.
R.S. Sodhi, Managing Director, Gujarat Milk Marketing Federation, popularly known as AMUL. Welcome, Mr. Sodhi.
Hello, how are you, everybody?
Yeah. Avinash Paranjape, founder and trustee, the National Smallholder Poultry Development Trust. Welcome, Avinash.
Thank you. Namaste.
And finally, Mr. Vijay Mahajan, who is the director at Rajiv Gandhi Institute of Contemporary Studies, who has very graciously also agreed to moderate today's session. So just to mention,
everybody.
Welcome, Mr. Mahajan. So we'll have this session for about an hour and a half. After the speakers have finished speaking, we will have time for questions, some of the questions that we have already received in advance and some that we will receive during the course of the webinar. So over to you, Vijay Mahajan. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjeev Fansalkar and Vinay for organizing this. Thank you, VillageSquare, and of course, all the participants. May I request the people who are attending to, while they are welcome to use the chat, but not use it to just say, hello, I'm so-and-so. I think it keeps coming on the screen and is a bit distracting. If all 297 of you start doing that, we'll spend a lot of time looking at that. So may I begin by the sequence I plan to take is to start first with an overview of the macroeconomic situation and particularly the rural macroeconomic situation and the financial sector implications of that. So I'll request Usha to start with that. After that, we will go to Pravesh for an overview on the situation in agriculture, what it's going to do to employment, to incomes, to poverty, and also I've already been in touch with him over the last whole month. He has some very concrete suggestions. I request all of us to also give specific suggestions for the thing. Then we go to Dr. Sodhi to specifically talk about the dairy sector, but just before this conference started, I was complimenting him for the amazing logistics chain that Amul has maintained throughout this crisis. And so there may be lessons beyond the dairy sector from the NDDB Amul experience. Then we go on to Avinash. Avinash has done many, many things, but these days, two of his great interests are poultry, because he's also on the National Smallholder Poultry Development Trust, which works all over India with small producers, and he's been working for a longer period on water. So I'll request Avinash to cover those. And then finally, I will come in to talk about the non-farm sector, such as it is in the rural areas, but also the urban informal sector, because of the fact that a lot of the urban informal workers are actually rural migrant workers, who many of whom have come back. Many others will come back in the next 2-3 weeks as the lockdown restrictions lift up more. And so they will add to the rural workforce looking for work. And I hope each of us will take about 11 to 12 minutes so that we can finish the first part of it in about an hour. And then we keep it open to the audience for about half an hour of questions and answers. So Usha, may I request you to start, please? Thank you so much.
So thank you very much, Vijay, and good afternoon, everyone who's on this webinar. Vijay, I thought we are going to do a couple of minutes in the beginning and then coming back for a more detailed thing, or you want us to straight away do 10 minutes? Okay.
Usha, do your full 10 minutes, but okay. During the Q&A, I think we'll all get a chance to come back again.
Okay. So I guess, the world has never seen anything like this before. Not even 100 years ago when, 50 million people died in the Spanish flu. Things were very, very different then. You didn't have aeroplanes and you didn't have automobiles and you didn't have this kind of global integration. But still the flu did spread across the world. And in India itself, 10 to 12 million people died. Today, COVID-19 is obviously inflicting huge and rising human costs worldwide. And the measures, and there is no cure available. And there's no vaccine available. And lockdown is not something that actually is going to destroy the virus. Lockdown is something that is probably government's time to do enough of testing and isolating and quarantining, and then doing their best to see how they can minimize the deaths on account of COVID. So as we stand today, there are bound to be spikes, there are bound to be recurrences, but the impact of COVID is obviously not just on the health of people. It is fundamentally on their livelihoods, on their opportunities. And for a country like India, with a huge segment of the population self-employed in the informal sector, daily wage earners, migrant workers, it's all clearly whether one is going to have a greater impact on the lives of these people on account of COVID or on the account of the lockdown or on the account of the economic outcomes of this lockdown. The IMF authority has come out with their projection, their estimates on April 14th, that the global economy is projected to contract by $9 trillion. This is the GDP of Japan and Germany combined, a negative 3% in 2020, much worse than the 2008-9 crisis. So in a baseline scenario, they say that assuming that pandemic fades away in the second half of 2020, and it's very difficult to even assume that will happen, and the containment efforts are gradually unwound, the global economy is projected to rebound by 5.8% as economic activity normalizes. But the risks clearly are for more severe outcomes. And in fact, they have assessed that for the Indian economy, it's probably one of the few economies which is going to have positive growth at 1.9%. and a turnaround maybe of 7.4% in 21-22. But that I think is again quite optimistic, and I think the only thing we can say is that we are not sure. So let's look at where we stand in terms of what are the bright spots on the horizon and what are obviously the challenges. The current macroeconomic are clearly, we have the advantage of the falling oil prices. So the kind of pace at which the oil prices have fallen it's been unprecedented, absolutely not known to man. Then we also have record buffer stock of food grains. We have the prospects of a very good harvest, and we also have prospects of a good monsoon. So these definitely put in well for the food security and hoping for agriculture to contribute to that positive growth. We have inflation under control. We have sufficient foreign exchange reserves. And these, I would say, are on the positive side. On the negative side, the growth and employment was slowing down even before COVID. We have challenges in the various sectors of the economy, like the power, the telecom, the airlines, infra facing challenges. The fisc is also under strain. Not even, I mean, if you take into account the off-budget of the balance sheet of the government, the off-budget borrowings and all the other liabilities, and both at the central level and state level, the headroom for any major fiscal package is clearly very, very challenging. Financial system, and this is what we say when we talk about the twin balance sheets, there are many companies, many corporates whose balance sheets are very fragile. And the banking system and the non-banking financial system, their balance sheets are also not only fragile, they're also vulnerable. So to get back to the rural sector, and I would like to, the outlook, like I said, is good. The good news is also that the lockdown is being lifted in the agriculture and allied sectors. Of course, this has impact in different states and districts differently. And the immediate challenges, as I see it, are really 5 in number. Bringing the produce to the market for both the transport. It's not only a question of removing the transport within intrastate and intra-district, inter-district. It's also across states. And even if that is allowed, we need the truckers to come back to work. I read somewhere that 75% of the truckers have just refused to come back to work. So we just need to get the transport going. And like Vijay said, maybe Dr. Sodhi could throw some light on that. We've got to get the labor back. In some parts of the country, a lot of labor has come back, and maybe it's come in time for the harvesting and for the sowing. In other parts of the country, labor is just not available because they've moved out. For example, in Maharashtra, where I live in Kolhapur, the neighbor Karnataka, we get labor from there and from Telangana. Now, most of them have gone back, so you don't get labor for the harvesting. So labor is going to be an issue. Credit for seasonal agriculture operations. Of course, there has been a moratorium announced by the Reserve Bank, which really means that whatever crop loans or KCC was due March 1st, so March, April, May end, say June 1st, these would not be treated as overdue, and that would render the farmer eligible for fresh finance. So that's a good thing. But there are a number of loans which become due in June, and one would assume that this would need to get extended at least, so that for fresh agricultural operations can actually commence. It would also be necessary to look at, and I'm not sure, this I guess you people will be able to let me know better, whether this is one of those situations which is treated. Reserve Bank has general guidelines for a package of measures to be taken as soon as there is a natural calamity. And I would say, if this is not, what else could be? So immediately, I guess, SLBCs have to be invoked, and then whatever measures have to be taken at the state level, at the district level, these have got to be taken. The more important one of this would be restructuring of an existing loan over a period of time, so that even though we are treating it as a moratorium and it's got accumulated, unless it is restructured, the burden on the farmer will be quite high. There could be specific problems in specific states. For example, Maharashtra is implementing a loan waiver scheme, and I would say the worst thing would be to do a loan waiver. So it would be much better to do a restructuring. Some of the things which I felt is really important when we are talking about rebooting agriculture. Obviously, there's a lot of short-term measures that all of us will be talking about to immediately reboot it. But I think from a sort of a thought perspective, I think we need to look at agriculture from a slightly longer-term perspective. I mean, many of the problems in agriculture comes because of the unremunerative nature of agriculture. Somewhere in all this, we have to look at what could be, more, how it could be made more remunerative, and whether we should be really looking at a new way away from what one calls industrial agriculture. Because I'm keeping in mind that we have had COVID now, but I do see, looking ahead at this century, we are going to face the problems coming out of climate change. We are going to face the problems coming out of loss of biodiversity. So it means that we need to look at agriculture itself from mitigating some of these future risks that we clearly see. And this is the opportunity for us to really reboot agriculture in a very much more less water using, less power using, more of dry crops, more crop per drop, as the Prime Minister so eloquently put it last year. And he also gave a very strong statement in front of COP last year in Delhi, where he talked about this whole way of dealing with land, use of land and use of water and use of natural resources management in a way that it leads to a sustainable agriculture. So this is a thought that I really want to leave in this web series, although we are going to address the immediate problem. The other thought that I did have is how do we really make this whole market for agriculture much more efficient? And I'm sure all of you have got much more experience than me will come in with a number of things. But I think making, we've had some relaxations of APMC here and there, but I think there's lots more to be done about the value chain. And in the context of the value chain, to really understand that almost 80% of the holdings are really up to 2-acre holdings. And how are we really going to help that kind of agriculture? The third point of a slightly longer term perspective that I would in fact say is what is it that we ought to be thinking in terms of the non-farm sector? Because 50% of the population is really in the rural areas, which is contributing to 17% of the GDP. So there is a need for us to also look at that. I think I will stop at this stage, Vijay, and hand over to the next speaker so that we can take up some of these points later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Usha. I particularly want to just mention to Avinash that the point that Usha made about using this crisis to restore our environment and particularly land, water, forest resources. I hope when you speak about water, Avinash will also cover that. On the issue of restoring efficiency in agriculture, of course, we have Pravesh immediately. Over to Pravesh.
Thanks, Vijay. And of course, always such a pleasure to listen to Usha ji with her panoramic understanding of the whole macroeconomic and especially the financial situation. So I will try and limit my inputs on the agricultural part of the rural economy context, though I will try and go a little beyond agriculture into the larger rural economy potential. So what we've essentially seen in the last month now, we are just over 30 days into the lockdown, is something totally unprecedented, which some people have compared the situation in parts to demonetization. I would humbly suggest that this is far beyond demonetization, because at least during the demonetization episode, economic activity per se did not stop. what we have now is a complete cessation, barring a few public services and some essential services. All employment, all income, and all investments have completely stopped. So actually, we don't have a template to deal with a situation like this, which is why I think we are all grappling with these ideas on creating some sort of a pathway to the return to normalcy. I also agree with Usha ji that this kind of situation, whether it's caused by a pandemic or, as she very, I think, insightfully said, increasingly, which will now happen due to climate change and the adverse impacts and the consequences of climate change, we are likely to continue to see such black swan events. They're not going to be so rare. So how do you prepare? And I think this is a very good opportunity for India to double down and sort of refocus on its basics. Now, you began, Vijay, by complimenting Mr. Sodhi that even during this lockdown, the milk value chain has more or less functioned, at least the organized milk value chains have functioned normally. And certainly, I think the organized milk sector, especially the cooperative sector, deserves a lot of credit. But may I also point out that the far bigger unorganized fruit and vegetable sector has also continued to function. It's quite amazing that despite the severity of the lockdown, prices of onion in metros like Delhi and Mumbai, which just for a short burst of excess rain end up touching 100 rupees a kilo, have not gone up inordinately. Of course, we know the demand is depressed, bulk demand from restaurants, etc., is depressed, but supply has continued unabated from the beginning of the lockdown. If anything, it's smoother now. Every vegetable, seasonal, exotic, in this season, Delhi gets a lot of tomato from the south. It's been coming uninterruptedly. All your colored capsicum, all your broccoli is coming from, the Nilgiris. It's, arriving every day in Delhi. So what I'm trying to say is that despite Hero Honda factory, there's no Hero Honda, the Honda factory or the Hero factory or the Maruti factory being shut down, the farm factory has not shut down. Despite no, support from a policy context, nobody's thought of how to keep these farms and dairies going, but they have kept going. In the first part of the lockdown, states like Madhya Pradesh and northern Maharashtra, they typically harvest their chana and wheat a little earlier than northern India. The harvesting of wheat continued despite severe shortage of labor, despite a lot of challenges, especially in the first 10 days that combined harvesters faced. So what I think the lesson that I am deriving from this is that you have a very resilient enterprise base, which is your farm enterprise base, run by these owner managers of these farms, which I believe that form the bedrock of your entire agricultural economy. And though everybody accepts they still employ 48% of the labor, they support something like 2/3 of the population of India, they are basically sharing around 15-16% of the GDP. So here is an opportunity to really use this thriving, to revive even a huge modern enterprise like Bajaj Auto. We all heard the MD speak on a business channel some days ago, and he was virtually saying that even if I could produce motorcycles, who's going to buy them? But a farmer is not facing this question, because one of the things that is continued to be in demand and will continue to be in demand is food and food products. So here is a ready-made production base, and here is a ready-made market for that production. All that we need to do is to perhaps put in some package of policy support to make sure that these enterprises are able to achieve their full potential as units of production, employment, and income. So I'm going to very briefly talk of 5 specific interventions which I believe could really spur this whole revival of the rural economy, led primarily by agriculture. So first, let's I think, put aside and address the problem of those marginal farmers and agricultural labor, which obviously will need something like a safety net to survive, who do not have farm size lots which could be productively invested in. So something like 1/3, I would say today, of the farms in India are essentially unviable from the investment point of view because they are so tiny, these holdings. There is some subsistence production for the home consumption, but mostly these people are dependent on wage labor. For this section, I believe that NREGA should be the primary instrument to be used. It should be liberally funded. And I dare to enter into Ushaji's terrain and say, this is one area where printed money should be just made available. We should blindly follow Keynes. We should make them dig holes and fill them up if necessary. I don't think we need to fill them up with mud. I'm associated with a group which has calculated that if from the 1st of May to the 31st of July, NREGA is used to generate saplings, we could generate 30 million, that's 3 crore saplings between 1st of May and 31st July. And those saplings then could be planted in August and September when the monsoon is receding, and we would have a huge green dividend coming out of this entire episode. So number one, NREGA should be used for the most vulnerable households who do not have productive assets like land or cattle to invest in. That taken care of, we now come to the productive part of agriculture where the farms could be invested in. And as we all know, and you've spent your life addressing this issue, how do we get capital to these people? Given the situation of banks, which Ushaji described, given the current situation of NBFCs, which of late had emerged as significant lenders in the agri space, I believe that today we don't have time for this experimentation. The government needs to get finance into the hands of farmers directly through the primary agricultural cooperative societies, through commercial banks, through a special line of credit, through the Kisan credit cards. Whatever means are available should be used to put money into the hands of farmers so that we have one of the biggest Kharif programs going into the next season. Let's not forget that the rural areas are going to see an influx of surplus labor, because I think it's very clear that the migrant labor, which has been temporarily halted in urban areas, there is enough pressure building up, and it's evident that sooner or later they are going to be bussed back into their home districts. So now, in an already over surplus labor situation, we are going to have a further infusion of labor. And the only way that these people can be productively absorbed is a combination of NREGA expansion and increased investments on the farm. And that's going to make it possible to use this labor for productive employment and investment and production. The third part of this is that we've talked for a number of years about Make in India for the world, but limited that to the industrial and the service sectors. I think that this COVID emergency, and I call it an emergency, should drive us to add agriculture to this, to look at the world as a market and not just India. We all understand that the severity of COVID is far greater in regions like Europe. Increasingly, Northern America is emerging as a major site of this pandemic. And I believe that there is a huge opportunity for India to tap the world food market as a supplier. And I think that over the next 2 years, India should use this opportunity to massively upgrade its agriculture. And a lot of work needs to be done. I'm not suggesting that after the Kharif season, we'll become big exporters of paddy or pulses. There's a lot of work which needs to be done on technology, on meeting standards, on controlling residue levels, but we can get into that. But if you start today, by the third season, that is to say by Rabi 2021, India could actually be a very major player in the world food export market. The fourth point which I'd like to make is the larger rural infrastructure point. Again, this is an area where the surplus labor, which is now going back to the villages, could be productively employed. It's not going to be possible to revive real estate, which is the major absorption of the migrant labor that comes to the cities. It's going to take a while before construction revives. It's going to take a while before tourism revives. It's going to take a while before our whole restaurant and that whole low-grade service industry revives. So this labor is likely to remain in the villages for at least the next 18 to 24 months. And I believe this is a great opportunity to upgrade our rural infrastructure. We've seen the benefits of rural roads already. I believe the time has come to now replicate this into things like rural go-downs, into building schools, into building ICDS centers, and most importantly, into building the physical health infrastructure, which does not exist in most parts of central and northern India. The south, as you know, has done a much better job of this. But if you look at the majority of states in the Hindi heartland and going well into the east, this physical infrastructure of primary health centers, district sub-health centers, these do not exist. So I think this is a great opportunity to use this labor using public money, and I go on insisting this is not the time for PPP or trying to attract private investment. This will have to be public-led investment. Finally, I'd like to conclude by suggesting that we need to look at this opportunity to unshackle a number of things, and I'm looking forward to hearing Vijay's remarks on the non-formal sector. And I'm not going to talk about that, but I want to flag it that our blocked value chains in the handloom sector, in the handicraft sector, in the small ruminant sector, all these off-farm sectors could offer huge employment and income potential if the proper policy package is created. So I'm going to stop here and look forward to listening to the other panelists and maybe responding to some questions at the end. Thank you, Vijay, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Pravesh. Indeed, there are already some questions for both you and Usha appearing on the Q&A, sign below. So if you feel inclined to answer them online, you are welcome. But of course, we'll have a Q&A session. Let me immediately move on to Mr. Sodhi, the Managing Director of Amul.
Yeah, thank you, Vijay. I'll be speaking on this rebooting rural economy policy perspective, especially with respect to animal husbandry or more of dairy. And that too also today, because still we do not know what is the impact of whatever corona and impact on rural economy, food, or the full economy as the things progress. But I can only say gradually things are looking up. Today is always better than the yesterday. I can only say, as far as our dairy sector is concerned or the food sector is concerned. Already,
Sodhi Saab, can you be a bit louder, Sodhi Saab? There's some request for people from people.
Okay, is it okay? Can you hear me properly? Is it okay, Vijayji? Hello.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, sir. Okay. So what I wanted to say is basically, like the Praveshji mentioned, Ushaji mentioned, now everybody realized in this whole lockdown, what people are talking right from morning to evening, the one topic is always there, every home, everywhere, it is the food. And I think besides the warrior which we are talking about, the doctors, nurses, administration, the police, I feel farmers have also proved that they are the warriors. And it is because of our food security that we are facing this corona without any threat of food security. 1.35 billion. And fortunately, we are producing ourselves and consuming ourselves, which is the biggest advantage. Coming to the dairy side or animal husbandry side, animal husbandry side is contributing to around 4.2 or 4.3% of a 3 trillion GDP of India, which is around 11 lakh crore. And dairy out of it is around 8 lakh crore. And organized sector, cooperatives and private together is 2 lakh crore. Out of that, 60% is the cooperative. And in the whole, if you talk about the farmer's income, we know that out of the total average farmer income, 12% is contributing by the animal husbandry. And the growth rate wise, animal husbandry is giving 14% growth, vis-a-vis less than 3% in the farmer's income. And gradually we always seeing that disparity between urban income, urban household income and rural household income is reducing because of growth rates are lower in the rural economy. So one thing is we have to take care of more of the employment in the rural India. We have to see how we can reboot the economy in the rural India through animal husbandry, because that has got more opportunities, more potential, and growth rate is higher. Now coming to this corona impact on dairy per se. You see, like all perishable fruits, vegetable, I consider even the poultry and milk, there was an impact in the beginning because there was a threat that it will not be able to reach. But fortunately, like Vijay ji mentioned, Pravesh ji mentioned, there has been no much problem, except in some areas, some states, farmers face the problem of connecting with the urban market and their prices, whether in the fruits or vegetable or in the milk. And poultry, I think after me, Avinash ji will tell that how poultry farmers suffered. And this whole thing was, farmers got less, whereas consumer continued to get it, farmers got less money. So what is the impact of this? I'll talk later on. As far as the dairy sector in Amul per se is concerned, I think we were fortunate because milk is considered right from beginning essential item. So whether it is collection of about Amul is collecting today around 25 million liters of milk from 18,500 village cooperative society, 36 lakh farmers, there was not much problem. We took care of all the safety measure in the village collection center also, and collection of milk. Same in the about more than 82 dairy plants, selling milk in the metro, whether Bombay, Delhi, Kolkata or Gujarat, because we are selling every day around 14 million liters of milk and #1 brand. So we didn't face much problem. Wherever small problems came, so we had taken care. But we took some measure, like first thing which we took care is that on 25th is communication. We communicated with all the stakeholders, whether farmers, transporters, or the consumers, distributor, dealers. They are saying that what is the purpose of this milk or dairy industry, how important is this, and you are not only doing your job, you are working for the national cause. And we realize that everybody has come forward and given much more than our expectation. I mean, we are not to tell anybody. No doubt, everybody was given more incentive. We, on 25th, we announced incentives for everybody, whether we are given more wages for the workers or people who are coming in the plants or the field force or the C&F or loading and unloading or the transporter. Everybody was giving 15 to 30% more because it is called hardship, and hardship incentive needs to be given, and that really worked very well. And I can tell you what learning we have got out of this, whatever today, because which will be used in the future is, first thing is that it is very important to learn trust of all the stakeholders. It's not only the farmers in case of cooperative who are the owner or the consumer, but also the supply chain partner, transporter, distributor, loader, packaging material suppliers, machinery suppliers, because they are also under hardship. So we took care of everybody. So nobody is under distress or they are out of job. Then is for future, that is also true for any FMCG or any food company or for any other thing, is one has to keep the eggs in different baskets. You have to go from multitasking, multi-production facilities, multi-products, catering not only to the HoReCa segment or one segment, catering to multi-segments also, and also most important, multi-distribution channel. You can't depend on only a modern format or e-commerce or the general trade or the heat. We tried to use like ice cream distribution channel was like idle. So we use the ice cream distribution channel for our dairy or the fresh products. So these were the some learnings which we had. Now coming to the what is going to happen after Corona. Whatever I'm talking about today, things may change. First thing I feel after Corona, consumption of perishable fruits, vegetable, dairy, poultry will increase. Whatever we are saying, it is reaching, but still there are pockets where it is not reaching. Still, like Horeca restaurant, which is 15% of total perishable consumption, is not buying. Similarly, the daily wages people, their wages have reduced. People are not earning, so the consumption of perishable are reduced considerably. So you will see immediately after Corona, when economy settles down, consumption will increase because there has not been much increase in the prices of perishable. So, but production will decline. The reason is simple. First thing is farmers have not got good price for the perishable. I give you example of dairy. Lot of people in this will be from Maharashtra, UP or Haryana. In cow milk prices in Maharashtra before Corona was 32. And their private sector or unorganized sector is a major player. Somehow cooperatives are not very aggressive or very organized there. Prices reduced to 20 rupees and there were no buyers. We started getting phone calls directly from the farmers having 20, 30, 40, 50 cows that, sir, we are, throwing away milk. Can you collect it? Wherever possible, we are gone, but where we don't have infrastructure, so we have to refuse it. So, same we heard about vegetables. Fruits also. I heard in the Jadpur Mandi, only 25 to 30% apples are arriving. So, we are getting it because demand has reduced, but farmers are getting 20 to 50% lower price, where are unorganized sectors. So, what will the impact is production will reduce because farmer is going to invest less in the production of perishable. I think after me, Mr. Avinash will tell. When farmers got 10 rupees, 20 rupees kg for the broiler chicks, he'll not go for more chicks. So you will see the chicken price will double, mutton price will double, egg prices will double after 2-3 months. So I expect minimum 2-digit inflation after 3 or 6 months in the perishable. So what are the recommendation for this short term and long term? I think short term, as soon as it is, we have to see how to boost the production of perishable or the food. So first thing is you have to see how to provide them, like Usha ji also mentioned, incentive in the credit. Why not interest are mentioned? Right now we should talk about Amul or any cooperative because the small players stop collecting milk. Whether mithai shop or ice cream fellow or small dairy, we are getting 17% more milk. Punjab Verka is getting 40%. Haryana cooperative is getting 40%. Rajasthan cooperative is 30%. Even Nandini is getting 12%. Everybody is getting. So what is happening is our working capital is blocked in the inventory because surplus milk is being converted into commodities. And unfortunately, dairy is not included in the priority sector where interests are mentioned like crop loans, interests are mentioned. It is not included. NABARD has been given 24,000 crore rupees to finance, but dairy is not included. We have to buy from the, we have to take money from the banks or whatever any other industry is taking based on your credit rating and anything. So one is how to put more money in the perishable sector. Second is that this is also the time to scale up the organized or cooperative sector because farmers have learned, consumer learned that in case of distress, it is a cooperative or the organized sector which will come. So this is a time to scale up because you have got the trust of both the important stakeholders. Then is one area I think which is for agriculture is what I feel is if you want the wheel of economy to move faster, you have to increase the consumption. And consumption can only increase if we spend more. And that money, instead of giving 1 lakh, 2 lakh, 3 crore, lakh crore of rupees to the industry, which will invest in long term, give that money to the farmers. 70% people have. Instead of 6,000, give 24,000 rupees in the Prime Minister Fund. Farmers will literally spend on food, on clothes, on any education, anything, and that will improve the demand of all segments. It will increase the production, it will increase the employment in the urban India, and the whole wheel of economy will start moving. And in the long term, I think is we have to work how to increase the productivity. I mean, animal husbandry, that is the area we have to invest. Second is, most of the developed countries suffered a lot in this corona. I'm talking about dairy, USA, Europe, they have suffered badly. I mean, 10 to 20% milk is not being collected. Prices have dropped. So what I fear is, after this corona is over, all these countries are going to put a lot of pressure on India for free imports of dairy or other fruit. So we have to see how to protect our policy makers, our policy holders to ensure that this time after corona, we have to be with the side of Indian farmers, Indian producers who are really stood with us during this corona and has given us the food security. And the other sector is, I think, is the why not put dairy sector also under the priority sector? I think Usha ji also talked about that. And I think overall, I think this is a golden opportunity for India after corona to grow at much faster pace than in India. And our confidence in Indian economy, Indian policy. I'll give 100 marks to Indian administrators. They are really stood with us or with farmers. We have not to approach people. I mean, problems are there at the ground level, but every IAS officer, every collector, every secretary, every chief secretary, all ministries come forward to help. All the permission, wherever problem, one notification after other notification. Usha ji mentioned about truckers problem. I remember when we faced, initially they said the trucks were allowed to go with the essential items. We faced the problem that trucks are allowed, but empty trucks are not allowed to move. So when we brought this into the information of the concerned people in Delhi, next day notification was issued. I remember, I mean, lot of our truckers faced problem. Intrastate was not allowed. So whichever chief secretary we talk, they immediately started doing intra. I know that lot of trucks are standing still on the road because the drivers have ran away because they got pressure from their family. They were not allowed to go back to the villages if they take a round of Bombay or to the Delhi. So those pressure, but gradually, I have gone just now from Anand to Gandhinagar for some meeting. When I was coming, I saw only trucks moving on the road, no car, nothing else. So infrastructure gradually is coming. Only, and now I think gradually shops are also going to be open from tomorrow or day after tomorrow with some social distancing. I think things will normalize. And the only thing is we have to take all the safety measures so that we can keep this spread of corona as minimum as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sodhi. You've raised some very practical and important points. One or two points, Usha, I want to flag to you. One is the possibility of inflation because reduction in demand, reduction in supply due to the farmers' response to depressed prices, and increase in demand partly because purchasing power is going to be maintained through various ways. So that's and particularly if you're talking about printing money, then on top of that, inflation could undo a lot of the welfare that is being done. Similarly, the point about using this as an opportunity to cooperativize farmers or organize them more broadly, it's a point I think, Pravesh, you may want to come back in the Q&A. I think what I find very, very interesting in this discussion, Usha has already pointed out to very long-term issues like how we can use this to combat climate change and at least mitigate its impacts. Pravesh has talked about agriculture-led growth, including a big export thrust. Sodhi is talking about enhancing farmers' cooperativization. I think this is the spirit in which we'll have to work, that while we are resolving short-term problems, we need to pay attention to the medium-term and long-term structural changes that are required and use this as an opportunity to leverage that. Avinash, I just want to start by saying that at least 3 speakers have talked about MGNREGA, and since you will talk about water, please try and link the two. Thank you.
First, let me give a brief understanding of the poultry sector. Much before the COVID outbreak happened in India, as the news started trickling in from China, fake news rounds on the WhatsApp linking chicken consumption with COVID infection started doing rounds. And way before the lockdown happened, wholesale chicken prices had already dropped to 10 rupees a kilo. So from mid-January to early March, poultry sector had already suffered a substantial loss. Mr. Sodhi made a mention of that. And now we are facing a situation where prices have started going up, not because demand has revived, but a large number of poultry producers have either shut down their sheds or have culled their live birds, and there is simply supply shortage. Because there is a supply shortage, demand is prices have started picking up, but poultry producers are unable to take advantage of this situation. So we are in a very precarious situation where much of the poultry industry, and certainly the cooperative industry that is organized under National Smallholder Poultry Development Trust, we have wiped out nearly all the working capital. And in order to start the whole business again, we will need injection of fresh capital. As it turns out that there are about 2 million poultry producers, about 1.6 million poultry producers for whom poultry forms a 40–50% part of their income, and remaining where poultry is the only source of income. Now, when they have lost all their income and all their working capital, there would be a need to inject fresh capital. Now that lockdown has been partially lifted, it is lifted for the agriculture and poultry sector. We are in a precarious situation that the negative sentiment of poultry has not yet vanished, both from the minds of the consumers and in the village. So while we are making attempts to restart the poultry operations in villages, in quite a few villages, we are experiencing a situation where the village panchayat is saying that, no, we don't want to start poultry. And we are at a loss to understand how to deal with this psychological negative that has been associated with the poultry industry. So both in the consumption side and on the production side, there are going to be issues that we are going to face. Now, even if the lockdown is removed, we are not very sure how aggressively we can restart the operations. First of all, the demand is going to be an issue because hotel and restaurant, that HoReCa segment, that constitutes about 50% of the demand for poultry products. And that is unlikely to come back to normal. So we are anticipating a situation for the next medium term. Demand for poultry products is unlikely to reach the pre-COVID levels. It might be just about 50% of that. So an average smallholder poultry producer who used to make 30 to 40,000 rupees of supplementary income, for many of them, this was the only cash income. They are going to find at a complete loss as to where to find this income. Maybe they will get 10 to 15,000 rupees over the medium term. But my worry is even more fundamental. If for some reason we are unable to deal with the negative sentiment associated with the poultry, then something in the nature of a permanent downward shift of the demand schedule is likely to happen. I mean, I am reminded of my intermediate microeconomics textbook, where it states that if the demand schedule shifts downwards, that means there is a change in the attitude and tastes and preferences of the consumers, then at every price point you are going to sell less. If that happens, then there is going to be a major structural change in the poultry industry. So I believe that on the policy front, a very big one-time injection of working capital is required. And that too, it is required directly in the hands of the producer companies, who in turn can restart operations and then pay their members. One positive thing we are experiencing is that because maize and de-oiled cake, soya de-oiled cake, they are the major ingredients of poultry feed. And because of a fall in demand for poultry products, prices of maize and soya have also dropped. So that is good news for poultry. It might increase the margin. So even though capacity utilization may come down, poultry producers may be able to get a slightly higher income. But that's going to be bad news for the upcoming Kharif season. So all in all, the scenario for poultry is not very optimistic. Unless we have a one-time working capital injection of the order of 500 crore plus in the entire sector. Coming to the water side, we have been doing a lot of work with individual farmers. We are trying to construct water harvesting structures for individual farmers. And that has been paying very good dividends for the farmers. Unfortunately, in the policy framework and in the existing irrigation bureaucracy, financing of small water harvesting structures is not seen as a initiative where government funding is possible. So we have been working on this for the past 7-8 years, mainly in coastal Maharashtra, where an investment of 25,000-30,000 rupees results in a rainwater harvesting storage of about 10 to 15,000 liters, and that becomes sufficient for vegetable cultivation, horticulture cultivation. So using NREGA, if a large number of such water harvesting structures are created, I think that will provide a great boost for the agricultural economy, especially for smallholders, vegetable and horticulture production, fruit production. So wherever creating water harvesting structures is not a part of priority sector lending, or it is not a part of the irrigation support mechanism from the government irrigation bureaucracy, if that is made a part of the package, then using MGNREGA money, a large number of water harvesting structures can be definitely created, and we can have a very long-term source available for making water available for agriculture. I think I will stop here, and I think we are running out of time also. So let Vijay take over.
Thank you very much, Avinash. I will actually, we've now run out of all the speakers' time, so I'll try and do my job a little more quickly. First of all, the non-farm sector, you know, as it is, though about a third to maybe as much as 40% of rural income comes from the non-farm sector, in terms of number of people employed who live and work in rural areas in the non-farm sector is much smaller. It's only 15-20%. There's a concept of daily commuting from rural areas to small towns, and so that becomes urban non-farm sector, urban informal sector. And of course, there's migration for multiple months and so on, which is why I will also talk about the urban informal sector workers who would have come back. So the rural non-farm sector, that is, which is strictly located in rural areas, is broadly three kinds. One is small agro-processing. The second is small handicrafts and handlooms and basically very small household industries like beadi rolling. And the third is a whole range of services, typically one or two of a kind in each village, maybe 4 or 5 kirana shops, maybe one or two tailor shops, and one motorcycle repair, so on and so forth. So now of these three, the one which is really taken a setback, and Pravesh already alluded to it, is the one where there's really no local market, which is the handloom, handicraft, and other such products. Even beadis is an example of that, where the production may happen locally in clusters, but basically it's all meant for the outside urban market. And this is the sector which is suffering both due to logistics. It will also suffer due to, demand shortfall for the next several months, maybe certainly a year. And it will suffer also because of, the general disruption in the economy. The short-term solution for this is common to what we talk about the others, but let me just also talk about the other two parts. The localized agro-processing sector actually is okay. It's and it would probably, as Pravesh mentioned, the one sector which is held up is the unorganized fruits and vegetables distribution sector, which is basically, also there's a significant amount of rural non-farm sector there in terms of procurement, sorting, grading, packing, transporting, and so forth. So that will quickly spring back. The larger agro-processing sector, of course, which are factories, for example, solvent extraction plants in soya or sugar mills, they will take longer and they will also suffer from demand-side infirmities. The dispersed services sector at the moment has a serious setback, but that will be one of the first to come back. In fact, kirana shops has been the third part of the economy which has broadly remained functioning, although at a lower level of turnover. So the dispersed services sector will remain. So on the whole, with the exception of the handloom, handicraft, and external sales kind of products like BDs, the rural non-farm sector would probably not get as much of a setback. But because a lot of the urban informal sector workers have already come back to their native villages, and many more will come back in the next 2-3 weeks when the lockdown reopens, at least partially. And that may add a significant number of unemployed to the rural economy on the one side. And let's not forget that as much as a third of rural incomes was coming from migrant remittances. And so not only has one person come back from Bombay or Delhi or wherever, but the money he or she used to send has also stopped coming. So there's double trouble. And so the answer to all of this has been already mentioned, but basically May, June, July. Pravesh mentioned May and June. I would add July because the monsoon sets in quite late in significant parts of the country. Basically, we need to focus on direct benefit transfers, cash transfers for the weakest, the disabled, the aged, and so forth. Already some money has been put into the Jandan accounts of women. We need to focus on the PDS and ensure that it functions well. Usha mentioned that we started off with a very good stock of food grains, and we are likely to get a good bumper harvest. And as long as procurement and movement of food grains happens, I think the PDS making it function is the key issue. And the reports are quite different from the southern states versus the Hindi heartland. The biggest thing that we need to do is step up expenditure on MGNREGA. I have done very detailed calculations for a different platform, but the highest number of people that were employed in MGNREGA was about 7.6 crore last year. And there are actually 13.3 crore job cards. Most of them, are not used all the time. But this year, I expect at least 10 crores instead of the last record of 6.7 crore job cards to get activated. So if 10 crore people have to be employed, and the finance minister has already increased the wage rate, minimum wage rate to 200 rupees, and you're talking of at least 50 days of work over, say, 3 months, that's 1,50,000 crores. And that's more than 2.5 times the 61,200 crores that was provided in the budget by the finance minister this year. So serious amount of, but the good part of it is, as Usha mentioned and Pravesh also mentioned, that this can then be used to restore the permanent productive basis of our economy. And the example that Avinash mentioned about individual farm ponds and water harvesting structure, that's not just digging holes. It is digging holes, but filling them up with water, which makes those farms much more productive. And it's the best investment. The IRRs on those investments are typically 25-30%. For the nation, it's a great investment. We have to come out with regulations which will enable MGNREGA money to be used at least for such investments, even in private lands. And the point that Mr. Sodhi made, I think Usha can just pick up the phone and make a phone call at the right place. The fact that dairy is not part of the priority sector, at least for this year, needs to be completely revised, because particularly as we know in the agriculture sector, GDP as a whole, crop cultivation has been falling, and it's the allied sectors which have been growing. So really speaking, what is called agriculture and priority sector should be applicable to all allied sector, except when it is corporatized maybe. So, but May, June, July can be for these three things, for DBTs, for PDS and MGNREGA type of works. But starting August, I think the medium-term recovery issues start. And there I have three suggestions for the non-farm sector. First is that we should use this, even the next 2-3 months, to significantly upgrade the and train our fellow people in the sector to make the maximum use of digital communications, digital transactions, digital display. So basically, the combination of widespread smartphones and widespread mobile signal in the rural economy should be now made good use of, so that people can display their wares on the internet, they can book orders on the internet, they can receive payments on the internet. That still leaves the physical delivery logistics, but that will hopefully improve in the next few months. The second is organizing, and Mr. Sodhi already mentioned that this is a good opportunity to enhance cooperativization. But to use a more generic term, basically this is the time for producers to get more organized, and Amul is a good example, but many other places, wherever there have been, I was listening to another webinar where Vivekanand from South Indian Fisheries Federations mentioned that the community-based organizations of fishermen were the first to swing into action for relief and rehabilitation. So wherever that is there, and we must not forget that we have a very large stock of self-help groups around the country, and many of them have got federated at a higher level. Many of them, the federations have crores of money, some of it lying in their bank deposits. All that needs to be mobilized, and more can be actually sent through that channel to revive that end of the economy. The third thing is I still expect, Usha began by telling us before the meeting that a survey by one of the organizations she's the chair of, FES, showed that as many as 80% of the migrant workers who come back to Bihar say they will go back. Now, that may be exceptionally high, but I also estimate that maybe only at best about 1/3 may stay back, 1/4 to 1/3 may stay back, the rest will go back. But 1/3 is going to add 2 crore more people to the rural economy as workers and reduce remittances from 2 crore people. So unless they can get immediate productive employment, that itself will be a medium-term shock to the economy. And for that, one of the biggest enablers is credit, startup funding. And this is the time for the banking system to use both the self-help group channel as well as the Mudra loan product to significantly enhance credit. Mudra has given out nearly 19 crore loans over the last 4 years. That's, even if we assume there was a repeat loan every year, that's almost like 5 crore loans. We have only 6.6 crore non-agriculture micro enterprises in the country. So the reach of the banking system to the micro enterprise sector through SHGs and Mudra can be maximized, and this is the time for us to do that, if necessary by incentivizing banks that there shall be a government guarantee of up to a certain percentage, I would say 10% of the loan loss in such event if it happens. And so that the banks, they overcome their risk aversion in lending to this sector. One last point on financing. In a sense, because everything is risky, actually restarting these businesses, I mean, like Avinash mentioned in case of poultry, restarting these businesses with debt is a wrong idea. Debt is not the right instrument for startups. What we need is something which is missing in our nations, indeed the world's financial architecture. We need something called micro equity. We need amounts like 1 lakh, 2 lakh to be available in the form of equity, in the form of partnership finance, which means agar doob gaya to doob gaya, lekin agar munafa hua 40%, तो उसका भी 50-50. And that means that we need a new regulatory framework for microequity, and this can then build on the RBI's already approved P2P lending framework. We can have, in addition to P2P lending, we can have P2P microequity as a product, which will then bring significant amount of money, which is lying as saving deposits with the middle class, with some incentives, to sort of kickstart the rural economy. We'll have to think of some very unusual and new institutional sort of solutions. So with that, I would stop, and I would request Vinay and Sanjeev to share some of the questions. I've been also looking at, there are already 69 questions which have come up during the discussions, and there were, I believe, a few hundred before that. So best of luck, Vinay and Sanjeev, in summarizing those. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay, and it's been a very stimulating last 1 hour. I have a few questions that I've tried to club them together based on large number of questions that we've received. So I will probably ask a question, and then maybe Sanjeev can ask the next question, so we can go quickly. I think there's one question which, Vijay, you have alluded to that, but there is a specific question on, in this situation, can farmers' collectives, such as FPOs, play a vital role in rebooting the rural economy? And if so, what policy initiatives can the central and state governments come up with to help them? You want to take it, or maybe?
Well, this is right up Pravesh's street. He's the creator of the FPO movement, or at least the recreator of the FPO movement. Pravesh, are you there?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Vijay. So I saw the question. I think it was posted on the Q&A also while others were speaking. So I was trying to stay a little at a macro level, because I don't think that any one silver bullet sort of solution, and I don't think the question is alluding to that. Of course, the entire architecture of the rural sector as it exists, PACs, SHGs, as you rightly said, federations, FPOs, everybody has to play a role. Where I might differ is that perhaps at this stage, we don't have the luxury of getting into fresh mobilization and institution building, because we all know that's a medium-term sort of outcome. What we are looking for is right now buttons to press, which would result in a sort of input-output response in a short term. So definitely FPOs have a role to play, but let's be honest that the number of FPOs or even the number of cooperatives, except in the milk sector, is not of the sort of scale which would carry the weight of this huge challenge before us. So of course we definitely want to engage the FPOs, and we could get into specific like improved credit access for them, improved market access, but those are all well-known things. What we need right now is massive pump priming, as many speakers, including you, have said, using MGNREGA as a tool to generate employment. That will create demand, number one, demand for food. That will incentivize production. And I go back to my original intervention. We need something beyond the local rural economy to, excite, shall we say, these rural producers. And given the fact that we today are surplus internally as a market on all food products, all cereals, pulses, also now lately, except oilseeds, we are surplus in every other product, milk, fruits and vegetables. So the only way we can move to the next level is to open up something like exports. As I said, that's a pathway, but that will require investment today. And that is what I believe would spur the next level of income generation and employment generation in the rural areas. So I'll say this much.
Thank you. Thank you. Sanjeev, you want to ask the next question? Sanjeev, are you there?
Seem to be there. answer the question on inflation that Vijay raised?
Usha, please go ahead. I think Sanjeev has momentarily stepped out or something. So please go ahead.
Vijay, can I answer that question on inflation?
Yes, yes, please go ahead, Usha.
Yeah, because you did raise that question, and I think it was also, the point was made by, I think, Dr. Sodhi, was it? Yeah. So my own assessment was that because of the very low oil prices and because of the sufficiency of agricultural supply, we are not going to have have inflation at that kind of sort of worrying levels, except if the demand push is expected to activate production and and not really to sort of chase too few goods. So the demand push factor for inflation, I don't see it happening, especially at a time when our entire production cycle is going down. Cost side of inflation, which usually for us it comes from the food and from the oil, and I think that is also limited. So the risks of inflation, I don't think, are so high if specific items, onions and certain items can be managed well. So I think that was my kind of a take. I thought, I think is Suhas there? Otherwise, I thought one or two more questions I'll just answer, which has come as a general, I read through all the questions and I found one thing that is kind of coming up again and again, and Vijay also alluded to, is this whole business of restarting financing for the small business sector, for agriculture, for self-employed, for the non-farm agro-processing and various kind of startups. I really like the idea of micro-equity. And I think it's a great idea, Vijay, to visualize the regulatory framework. In P2P lending and in various other schemes where individuals would like to, invest in certain schemes where probably they get a better return. The biggest problem is, although it may not be systemically important in terms of the total amount, the number of people who get taken for a ride by fly-by-night schemes in India, and I know. So that is the kind of safeguarding that we have to ensure. So you need to have, and this is what was discussed in the last time's budget as well, social stock exchanges, where you have a kind of vigilance or an alertness or a due diligence over the kind of people who are registering for getting such finance. One can entrust it to very well-known NGOs, but huge amount of partnership between the state governments, the civil society sector and the startups. I think it's a great idea, but I think it requires, because I always worry about the, the way that we can just take people for a ride by schemes that promise higher returns, and people are so gullible. So that is the one thought I would respond. As far as debt financing is concerned, I'm a little surprised why we still don't have any agriculture credit guarantee scheme. Loans for agriculture, loans are not under any credit guarantee scheme. Whereas Mudra has got loans for MSME. So crop insurance is one part, but many things are not just crops. There's a lot of agriculture loaning which is not related to crops. So while we need to revamp and have another look at our crop insurance schemes, I think agricultural credit guarantee scheme and a credit enhancement scheme, if the 10,000 crores that has been given to NABARD is really, used for providing such credit enhancements, and NABARD uses also its own capital for providing these kind of credit enhancements where 100% guarantee is not given. It could be, like you said, it could be a first class guarantee, maybe not as low as 10%, it could be slightly higher. Then you leverage the amount available with you 10 times. You can do it 10 times, or you do it 5 times or 6 times. So I think there is a opportunity here for us to look at that roadblock today, which is that risk aversion. So I feel I'll just leave that thought there because I think it needs to be developed and fleshed out quite a bit. But I think it's really important for us to, I mean, there was all the kind of credit securitization products which had come earlier. But we need to again look at this loans by NBFCs, therefore loans to NBFCs. The whole thing, whether we can bring it under some sort of credit.
Thank you so much, Usha. This is I think this is something worthy of a side conversation, which I'll have with you by email. But let's go ahead. Sanjeev, can you just adjust the camera? We can't really see you other than your forehead.
I think there's something, his connection got lost.
Okay. So then Vinay, why don't you carry on?
Sure. So we have just about 5 minutes left. I probably can, one question which probably has not been talked about much is, how do we engage local community institutions in rebooting the rural economy? Is there something we can talk about from a policy perspective on that?
Well, may I request Dr. Sodhi initially, and then maybe Avinash also to speak on this briefly?
Yeah, I think sorry, I'm not able to understand, what do you mean by local community?
I mean, cooperatives is an example, but self-help group federations and so forth, NGOs.
I think that has been already discussed by the other panelists, because we have found that wherever these farmers' organizations are there, they are able to take care of not only the farmers but also consumers. So that is only possible, I think, is we have been talking a lot about a successful model like Amul or other cooperatives, how to replicate, how to, but what I find is that the scale is missing, and we always expect government to do it, which is wherever government has come, it has not been successful. I think that here the local leadership needs to be developed. So first leadership. The reason for success of Amul is selfless, dedicated political leadership and a very committed professional leadership. But that is only you have to search, make them together, and then work for it. But I feel, especially in perishable products, opportunities are more. And instead of the other food items, perishable food products, opportunities for local communities coming together, forming cooperatives or FPO or self-help group and working, and maximum investment need to be done on the market linkage than giving more emphasis on production and process. Market linkages needs to be given the maximum emphasis.
Avinash, both in water and poultry, you use community institutions.
No, in water, we are not using community institutions. In fact, in water, we have not been successful, in fact, in water, most people say me and my plot and my this thing. It requires huge organizational expense to organize community under water. That's what our experience is. And
Usha
in poultry,
wants to come in for a second. Usha?
No, the entire operation of Foundation for Ecological Securities is through using local communities, Panchayati Raj institutions, and totally local bodies to really deal with natural resources management, including water and land. And now there is a GIS-based platform which can actually help the communities plan for their own watershed management and their own water land and water use in a much more efficient manner, which uses satellite images and on a totally geospatial basis. So it has, and there is a tool that one can use, it's called CLART. That tool can be used for actually communities to plan their own watershed management. And I think the way to use local communities, to use the local panchayats, is to use the local bodies. And there are so many communities everywhere that FES is working is only through working with local communities. There's no direct intervention. So I think there's a huge potential for local institutions.
All right.
Avinash, let's go back to your experience in poultry.
In poultry, we did a lot of work, broad-based work, not restricted to poultry. But now that poultry as such has obtained a negative connotation, I'm not sure how that can be used as an instrument of strengthening broad-based community institutions. I think now is not the time.
Okay. Well, let me just, I'd already mentioned self-help group federations and self-help groups. I think that's a very large stock of community institutions which has got built up over the last 25, 30 years. And unlike the FPO system that Pravesh said is still quite thin and not very strong in most of the cases, the SHG Federation is already in its, in its mature phase. And it can deal with 50,000 to 1 lakh crores a year, no problems. So that's the kind of money that we need to weigh in for kickstarting the rural non-farm sector. Everything else which is said about agriculture, of course, is very valid. I think Usha's point about, this is the time to introduce an agri credit guarantee program is a very valid one, and we should not think of it as only narrow crop cultivation, but indeed all the whole natural resource regeneration of the kind, FES kind that you were talking of, and the water harvesting structure that Avinash was talking about. Vinay, do we wind up?
Yeah, so we have kind of run out of time. It's been very, very interesting, and we want to keep going. But we have totally run out of time. I'd like to thank all our viewers, participants. Till this time, I can see 313 participants still there for signing up for the webinars that we have been conducting. We've been extremely encouraged by your overwhelming support that we've received. We will continue to host webinars on different topics. The next webinars we are planning on are preparing to protect the flood-affected persons from COVID-19 and strengthening rural health services to combat COVID-19. And we'll very soon notify the dates and the speakers for these webinars. Please do write to us if you have any topic in mind that you would want us to host a webinar on. And if you wish to learn about earlier 2 webinars, listen to the recording, do visit villagesquare.in/webinars. We have created a microsite. If you want to know about the speakers, about organizations, please visit there. And once again, I'd like to thank our speakers for making today's webinar such a thoughtful event, and also thank you very much for your valuable time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.